affordable housing program was one of President Uhuru Kenyatta's pillars of the Big Four agenda. Today we are here to speak with Housing PS Charles Hinga on the progress that has been made. The initial plan was to construct 500,000 homes. What is the situation on the ground? We will find out today. This is the Property Simplified show. I am your host, Claire Munde. Welcome. How many affordable housing units have been completed to date?
The number of houses that have been completed to date is not very easy to establish. And I'll tell you why. We have two sets of housing. There's what we call public housing, which is done on government land. And those ones where it's easy for me to give you that number, that figure, which is just under 9,000 units. The balance, and it's very important, even when as we get into the details of the affordable housing program, to understand that they're being delivered by private sector. So government's main role is supportive to the private sector. And this came as a result of the departure when the housing fund got frustrated in court. And it's very, very important for me just to explain to you what was the thinking at that time. But before even I get there, allow me just to paint for you the housing picture in Kenya pre-2017. We had a deficit of over 2 million housing units in Kenya. Our own demand every year is about 250,000 units every year. This entire market was making approximately 50,000 units. So it means that every year we are adding a deficit of 200,000 units. But very interesting is even when you dig deeper and find out what is this 50,000, what is the composition of the 50,000 that we actually make. What will shock you is that 49,000 out of 50,000 are houses that are for the high end. That is 3% of the entire population, meaning that 97% of Kenyans were only able to deliver 1,000 units a year. Now you get to understand why we have slums mushrooming everywhere, because we have one of the highest urbanization rates. We are urbanizing very fast. And when you look at urbanization, it is normally associated with good quality jobs and high quality life. But unfortunately, when people migrate and they come to the urban settings, and the urban setting is not producing the right kind of housing, they end up forming informal settlements. Now, that is a systemic problem. And that systemic problem has been with us pre-independence. Now, that is what this affordable housing agenda is all about. It is about fixing a systemic problem that has taken many years to make. And so therefore, when His Excellency, the President, asked me to come, I was in South Africa, I was doing my own things there, and asked me to come in and run this particular docket. The first thing that he had asked me about was to give him a blueprint. And we had a very candid discussion with him, because I was not part of the Jubilee government that actually put together the Big Four agenda. And, so obviously they had their own thinking, how they arrived at the 500,000 and so on and so forth. And so the question that I asked was, Mr. President, what is it that you're going to do different today that we were not doing yesterday that is actually going to break this systemic challenge? Because if it is business as usual, it is going to be the same thing you're going to do. You're going to keep on churning the same 1,000 and 49,000. And he said, that's why I have brought you. What is it that we need to do differently? And we said there are about 7 issues when I look at the housing market in Kenya that needs to be addressed. 5 of them are almost deal breakers, each one of them. The first one is the cost of land in Kenya. You cannot have affordable housing and the most expensive land in the African continent in the same sentence. So we said, what are we going to do about the cost of land? So there's a study that showed that Nairobi now has the most expensive land in the continent. So how do we achieve affordability when we have the most expensive land? So we said, okay, that's a big problem. There are certain things that we can do, but let's first of all think inwards. Government has the largest portion of land in the country. We are the land bank. Unfortunately, this land, in some cases, has been grabbed, sitting in parastatals. Kenya Railways is the biggest, probably the biggest landowner in Kenya. You know, when you try and think what are they doing with that land, there's nothing that they're doing that is helping to produce the kind of housing. So the first policy decision that we made was that we were going to look for land that is owned by government. And land in Kenya contributed, when we calculated, we did our numbers, between 40 to 60% of the entire cost of construction. Now, when you think about other developed economies that have managed to sort out issues of housing, land makes up about 10%. So we said if land is already contributing 40 to 60%, if we don't sort out the issue of land, we cannot have affordable housing. So as much as we want to do 500,000 units, you first of all must address the systemic issues, okay? Because perhaps of all the big four agendas, this was the most complex because of all the many nuances and the things that needs to be in place for you to attain success. So we had an onslaught on the issue of land. We went to cabinet, and cabinet actually passed, okay, what is called Development Framework Agreement. And government for the first time pronounced itself and said where these houses are being constructed on public land, the cost is zero rated for you as a Kenyan. Now that is massive, and we don't talk about some of these things that that are going to drive us to the affordability and hitting our numbers, because it means by that one decision we wiped out about 40% on average of the cost of construction. Of the total cost of the development. The second thing was the cost of construction. When I came in as a PS, I procured some police housing. When we looked at the cost at which the tenders came in, was in the north of 60,000 per square meter. Now, a cost of 60,000 per square meter is prohibitive. So we tried to look at what was driving this cost. So there was a lot of taxations, there was a lot of fees, okay? And processes that didn't make sense, okay? So we also had an onslaught on those ones. For the first time, today, and I can give you names of developers who are actually enjoying VAT exemption. Why VAT specifically? VAT in our sector, and I hope I don't get too technical, VAT is an actual cost. It's what we call a cash flow tax. Remember, you pay VAT today, but the house you're going to sell it in 3 years. So you have actually prepaid KRA, but the benefit you'll only, you're the developer, you'll only get the value 3 years when you sell the unit. So to us in our sector, it's a very painful tax. But more than that, when you sell a unit, we don't sell with VAT. So in other words, the cost of inputs, cement, steel, and so on and so forth, I cannot offset it. Because if you look at how VAT is levied, the input versus the output. And the net is what you pay to KRA. So in other words, ours, we have input, we have no output. So the amount that is 16% is an actual cost. So 40% from the cost of land, and then by government policy, we wiped out another 16% to the cost of construction. So what did we see? Today, we're procuring at less than 30,000 per square meter. Of course, because of Russia incursion in Ukraine, now we've seen the prices of steel, like steel has gone up by 100%. So we're working with National Construction Authority now to find out where we are right now in terms of the cost of construction. But it is insane at the moment. And also because of COVID, and it disrupted the global supply chain. The third thing was something we called titling. So there is the cost of land, but now there is the process of titling. Remember, this is a sector that is very capital intensive. You need a lot of money to do a development. Even your own standalone house, it is a lot of money. So if you're undertaking a development of 1,000 units, that's about 5 billion that you need. So it means you need investors. Now, who is an investor? An investor is someone who comes and says, I have my money, I want to invest, and I want to make sure that I get my money back. So how do they get their money back? They get their money back by ensuring that we sell and you have a title, or there is a bank that gives you a mortgage and can charge. We have a big problem with our titling section. And we also have another challenge on the sanctity of the titles. So if, as an investor, I cannot be able to trust that document, I am not putting in my money. That's why, again, here on the 12th floor, we had an onslaught on the issue of titling. And we said we cannot have these manual papers that keep on disappearing whenever they want to disappear. We had very opaque systems. And you know, opaqueness is good fodder for corruption. And so all these land cartels that you hear about here, they thrive in that opaqueness. So what did we do? We digitized. Nairobi registry alone makes almost 80% of our national registry. So that was the first thing that we did. And you know what? Because this is a huge disruption, it keeps on fighting back. But I'm so glad of what CS Karonei and PS Muragori and the other actors have managed to do in the land side, because they've unlocked financing. Okay, so without sorting out titling, it doesn't matter how good your policy, you can stand on top of cars and say, I'm going to do 1 million houses. It doesn't matter, because unless you're saying, I'm going to tax Kenyans and take that money and build houses. If you're talking about investor, there's no investor is putting in money when the title, if that paper is not worth. That was another major issue that we had to deal with before now you even actually start talking about counting the number of units. And then the fourth one, of course I said 7, but I just want to focus on the 4 big ones. Because if you don't sort out titling, you're dead on arrival, no affordable housing. If you don't sort out your cost of construction, you're dead. If you don't sort out the cost of land, you're dead. And it's actually not just land. It is also what we call beneficiating the land. So you find that we have huge chunks of land, for example, in Portland, here in Athi River, but it's not serviced. Okay, so if it is not serviced, meaning that there is no trunk infrastructure, there are no roads, there's no electricity, there is no water, sewer network. If I allow the private sector to build the horizontal infrastructure, the one that I've mentioned, guess what they're going to do to you as a potential home buyer? They'll take the cost, and then they lay a margin on top of that, because remember them, they're not philanthropists. They're in this to make a profit. So what happens to your cost of land was 40, there's another 15% from infrastructure alone. So government also made a decision that we were going to invest in opening up this land. So the last one was financing. And the way we looked at financing from both what we call the supply side and the demand side. Now, on the supply side means the developers. It was largely addressed by these 3 issues: land, sanctity of title, cost of construction, building techniques. We had an old building code in this country dated in the 1940s that only recognized stone as the only permanent building material. So one of the part of 39 legislations that this State Department has effected in these 4 years is changing our building code. Now we have a modern building code. Why is that important? Because we either had to adopt what we call the Euro code when we want to bring in technologies like EPS, when we want to bring in, people are talking about 3D printing. And, they're using panels, we're using stabilized soil blocks and so on and so forth. But according to our building code, old building code, we couldn't recognize that because it is not made of stone. So supply side, we looked at how do we help with the processes, but then also for financing. I'm going to come back to the supply side, because if there is one area which we have not really succeeded, is the supply side. But then let's talk about the demand side. The demand side is about you, the buyer. Now, we did a full analysis. We did housing study and surveys in every county in this country. We hired KPMG that gave us a very detailed housing survey. What did we find out? What are some of the things that we found out? That majority of Kenyans wants to own a home, but they can't. Why can't they own a home? Let's talk about first of all where there is empirical evidence. And the empirical evidence is in formal data of formal employed. We are about 2.4 million people who are formally employed. So you and I, we are formally employed. Out of the 2.4 million, 75% of the 2.4 million earn 50,000 and below. Okay? 50,000 and below. We have a law that says that you cannot deduct someone's salary below 30%, okay, of their disposable income. So it means that on average, if someone is earning 50,000, what is 30% of, it's about 15,000. So how much are you left with to work with? 35. And 35, they must eat, they must do other things. So when you start thinking about how much money can someone earning 50,000 allocate towards a mortgage, and you find the answer is 0. And that's why that 75% work in a bank. They tell them, okay, yeah, I can see you have a pay slip, you qualify, but you have to mortgage your life, basically. You have to go, they need collateral, they need a shamba, they need this, they need that. That is why majority of Kenyans that own a home even today have not been through a bank loan. It has been through a SACCO. Now, how does a SACCO model work? We come together, we changa, we find a plot, we buy, right? Then we repay for that plot. Once we have finished paying for the plot, then what do? We now changa again to do the cost of construction. On average, and I know it because my own father, I don't come from a family that had means. So my own father was a civil servant. My late father was a civil servant. My father died trying to construct a home for us in Bahati, Nakuru. 9 years. 9 years. He died not ever seen us move into that home. Why? Because he'll take a small loan here. He still has to take us to school. And that is the average Kenyan. That's how they go through. So when we talk about affordable housing and owning, how do you own when majority of the people are earning 50,000 and below? We have to come up with a funding structure. And that is where we came up with the two, KMRC and the National Housing Development Fund. As we speak, I have, and I'll share with you and I can give you, you can live with it. I have 564,384 units that are in different stages. At the time when I did this report, there were 2,592 that were completed. We have now since completed another 6,000. So I need to update that. We had another 40,452 units that were ongoing. And you can see them. I've given you a list of where they are. Each one of them with a number of units. Then I had 384,162 units. These are projects that have passed through this office. We have done due diligence. We have looked at the land. We have looked at the titling. We've said this is okay. And these ones are in what we call financial close. These ones now need the investors to go and finalize with their banks so that they can be able to. Now, remember, as I said, for you to get even an investor, what do you have to do? You must have the land. You must have the designs. You must have the approvals, even from counties and so on and so forth, the National Construction Authority and so on and so forth. So it's not an overnight thing. So you have 384 that have gone through that particular process. We have National Housing Corporation that has about 4,554 units that are under construction. And then we have, now the 384,000 are on government land. But we also determined that some of the best land is in the private hands. So we encouraged the private sector to bring in their own land. And we went out into the market and we advertised. And we got about 14,000 acres across the country. Out of that, I have 132,624 units that have been brought on private land. That gives you the 564,000 units. So out of those, okay, we then need to check how many projects have actually now gone through the last hurdle and they've started construction. The only data you can get, that data you can only get it from National Construction Authority. So I have this morning gotten the National Construction Authority data. And it shows from August 2017 to 31st of May, we had 260,149 units that had been approved and were under construction. Okay? And that contributed a total of 2.416 trillion shillings.
Today we have spoken with Housing PS Charles Hinga on the affordable housing program and the progress that has been made. This has been the Property Simplified show, and until next week, do have a good one. I have been your host, Claire Munde. Bye.